Anyways, welcome back to Story. We've been studying the Gospel of John last semester, and we're actually gonna continue until John 21. I said it. I committed to it. So on Easter, we'll cover the John's account through Easter. So you guys will get the whole Gospel of John this year. So where we ended was John chapter 7, and a big theme that we actually see in this text is a divided response that Jesus causes amongst people. So this chapter, generally people kind of skip over because there's not really exciting stories around it. John chapter 6 is like feeding of 5,000. John chapter 5 is like healing. John chapter 7 is a lot of conversation. It's like conversation back and forth. And a lot of it has to do with people's opinion about Jesus and actually differing opinions. So, I don't know what comes to your mind when you think about people or events that cause strong but divided response. So I was thinking about this, and one other example I thought of was the Cybertruck. Very divided response. Some people think it's an awesome invention, electric truck. Some people think it's a triangle on wheels, aesthetics versus function, right? There's a divided response. Or the Star Wars, The Last Jedi. Let me ask, how many, okay, I won't ask. But it's very divided. Some people loved it. It's actually the only movie that got a 90% on Rotten Tomato, but the audience score was about 40 to 50%. And, different Star Wars fans kind of hate it, love it. Yeah, it's just very divided. So here in our text, it's not quite like that, but people have very strong opinions about who Jesus is. So we'll take a look at that. So I have the text in front of in the sheet. So if you don't have one, there's some extras around. So what we're going to do is, it's a long text. It's front and back. So start with verse 1. You guys pair up or triple up, group up, and then read the text and note who are the characters and what are they saying about Jesus. So specifically, focus on that. There's a lot of different things in there, but just focus on what do people say Jesus is. So let's do that for, next 5-10 minutes. So if you don't have a paper, there's some in the front. So let's do that for a little bit. All right, let's come back together. I know that probably wasn't enough time. It's a long text. Just wanted to get you guys a little familiar with the text so that when I talk about it, you kind of have a little bit of a context. So, it says, just to explain a little bit, so he talks about, this is after the feeding of the 5,000, and, he performed a lot of miracles. So he has a lot of, I guess, fame, he's infamous, right? People are trying to kill him. It says, after this, he would not go about in Judea because the Jews were seeking to kill him. So this actually first came up back in chapter 5. I don't know how many guys remember, but chapter 5, after he heals the invalid at the pool, the Pharisees got mad because he was healing on the Sabbath, right? That's kind of the first time they get mad. And Jesus answered them, "My Father is working now, until now, and I am working." And then it says, this was why the Jews were seeking all the more to kill him, because not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal to God. So making himself equal with God, that's the point. That's the point where Pharisees were mad. And as it says here in chapter 7, verse 1, he would not go about in Judea because the Jews were seeking to kill him. That's why he's not going in. And then it says that the Feast of Booths was at hand. Just for people who are not familiar, it was one of the biggest celebrations. So everyone's in there. They kind of set up little booths like tents, not tents. They kind of had the biggest celebration where they come together to celebrate. And then it says, his brothers are saying, "Hey, go in, because everyone's there. Now you can make yourself known." Basically, you can do things openly, and you can show yourself to the world. Show everyone that you are the Christ. And Jesus says, "My time has not yet come." And we talk about that time earlier in this semester too. His time has not yet come, and we'll talk about that in John chapter 12. But it's not time. So then he ends up sending his brothers, but he goes in privately, right? So that's kind of where it is. And then he hears all these opinions about himself. So continuing on, so let's talk about just the fact that he was making himself equal with God. So let's just pause and marvel at how huge that claim is, right? He is making himself equal with God. God, the creator, right? God, the creator of the whole universe, the author of life. Jesus was saying that he was that creator. So that's why there is a lot of different opinions. So who is Jesus? Kind of listed out all the different opinions about him. Verse 12 says he is a good man. Or verse 13, he's leading people astray. Right? That's kind of one of the other opinions. And then later on, verse 20, you have a demon, kind of calling him, you're crazy. And then verse 41, finally, this is the Christ. Right? Some people say that this is the Christ. So we'll talk about each one, except the first one, that he is a good man, because the first one's actually not really an option. Even the first century Jews understood that he couldn't have been a good man because, they were trying to kill him, right? If he was just a good man, they would just leave him alone. But he was trying to kill him because he claimed to be God, right? We know that because he claimed to be God and he walked and talked, acting like he was God, he couldn't have just been a good man. Sometimes you hear in the internet like the conspiracy theory that Jesus was just a good teacher and after that he died. The disciples made him to be God. But actually that's not true. There's a lot of archaeological and manuscript evidence that Jesus claimed to be God. Even the first century historian Pliny the Younger, I think we talked about it during Christmas message, but he says, Christians were accustomed to meet on a fixed day before dawn and sing responsibly a hymn to Christ as to a God. This is a non-Christian historian talking about Jesus, right? Jesus claimed to be God, and that's just a fact. So he couldn't have just been a good teacher, good man, because he claimed to be God. So Jesus claimed to be God, and maybe some of you guys are saying, so what, right? But this claim actually cannot be lightly dismissed. The fact that Jesus claimed to be God, we really need to talk about it and think about it. Because there have been a lot of good moral leaders in the past, right? Gandhi, Buddha, Confucius. They're great moral teachers, great religious leaders. But none of them ever claimed to be God, right? The creator of the universe. On the flip side, there were a lot of kings, a lot of emperors who claimed to be God. But every single one of them were exposed as frauds or dismissed as crazy. Right? Except one, Jesus. So you can go, Jesus claimed to be God, but that's not possible to simply dismiss him because of these two reasons that I'm going to talk about. First one, Jesus performed miracles. So he performed actual miracles. You can choose to not believe in all the different healings or the raising of Lazarus and, the leper, healing of leper, all these things. You don't have to believe that. But there is one miracle that you cannot deny, and that is the resurrection. We have ample amount of historical evidence to believe that it actually happened. I'm not going to go into the details for the sake of time, but if you have any questions about that, the resurrection, you can ask any of the story members for a full explanation. You can really see that it's historically valid, and that miracle actually happened. Right? You can go visit the tombs of Buddha, Muhammad, Joseph Smith, any number of religious leaders, and as well as every single lunatic who call themselves God, and you'll find them at the grave, except one. Jesus claimed to be God, and he backed it up by rising up from the dead. So it's not something that we can easily dismiss. We need to investigate. Did Jesus really rise from the dead, or where did his body go? Second reason that we cannot just deny his claim is that he taught and lived a radically different life. So many leaders who claim to be God, right, in the past, they lived a very narcissistic life. They're usually full of themselves. And I think that makes sense because if they're God, everything revolves around them, right? So it makes sense that they would be full of themselves. Everything should revolve around you. But Jesus despite saying that he was God, was radically different, right? He was washing the disciples' feet. He never refused anyone who asked for help. And it was a big problem because he was like not even eating or sleeping because he was helping people. He touched and healed the lepers, the blind, the lame, all the outcasts of the world. He was there with the people that people didn't want to be with. He prayed for his enemies as he was being crucified. And that's only a handful of stories, but his life was full of stories like that. Jesus taught and lived a very radically different life. He actually lived what he preached, right? Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Turn the other cheek. Love your neighbor as yourself. And that was so powerful, just seeing that he lived what he taught. Just think about a guy like who's advocating like a healthy living. You need to eat healthy, fiber first, fat and protein after, then carbs. And you need to exercise 20 minutes a day. But then you see the same guy eating ice cream all the time and fried food all the time. Do you believe what he says? No, it's not. You don't have power because you don't live what you preach. But Jesus taught, and he lived out what he taught. So what do we make of the man who claimed to be God? So I want to talk about this quote from C.S. Lewis, and it kind of summarizes all of it. It's a little bit long, so just stay with me as I read it. I'm trying here to prevent anyone saying the really foolish thing that people often say about him, Jesus. I'm ready to accept Jesus as a great moral teacher, but I don't accept his claim to be God. That is the one thing we must not say. That's what we talked about, right? A man who was merely a man and said the sort of things that Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic on the level with the man who says he's a poached egg, or else he would be the devil of hell. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or else a madman or something worse. You can shut him up for a fool, and you can spit at him and kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let us not come with any patronizing nonsense about his being a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us. He did not intend to. So C.S. Lewis, the author, he's claiming that because Jesus claimed to be God, you cannot just dismiss that. There's only few options because he claimed to be God. And we need to really investigate. And he left two choices to us, whether to kill him or deny him, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord. So we're going to kind of explore that a little bit more. So some people in the crowd said that he was a good man, right? And like we talked about, he couldn't have simply been a good moral teacher because he claimed to be God. Like logically, it's not possible to be a good moral teacher and then claim to be God. Because if you claim to be God, that claim is either true or false. So what I'm going to talk about is called a trilemma, as C.S. Lewis talked about. So Jesus is God. That fact is either true or false. There's no in between. But let's say it was false. If it was false and you were not God and you knew that you weren't, then what does that make you? It makes you a liar, right? Because you knew that you weren't God, but you were claiming to be God, then you're a liar. If you didn't know that you were God, if you didn't know, then you're a crazy man or a lunatic. So if Jesus claimed to be God and Jesus is not God, it has to be one of these choices, either a liar or a lunatic. So let's take a look at each one. Was he crazy? Was he a lunatic? Well, if you look at his life and the fame that he had with the crowd, I don't think so. Generally, you know when someone is a little bit out of their minds and you generally want to move away from them, the crazy people on the streets. Like, Jesus wasn't that. Jesus had a follower, and people actually listened to his teaching, and today he's regarded as one of the greatest moral teachers. So it's not that. So was he a liar? People lie all the time, like to get ahead, right? Maybe to save face, to be favored. But who lies so that they can be killed? Do people lie so that they can be executed? more than that, tortured to death? Because that's why they killed Jesus, right? They were hating Jesus because he made himself equal with God. So do people lie to get that? I don't think so. I don't think I know a lot of liars, but no one that I've known lied to get killed. So then our final choice remains that he was telling the truth, that Jesus was God. Right? There's only three possibilities. He's either a liar, lunatic, or he is Lord. And to me, liar and lunatic just don't fit the evidence. And as Sherlock Holmes says, once you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth. Right? That's just a process of elimination. So before we jump to any conclusions, let's explore the consequence of believing that Jesus is God. So if Jesus is God, is who he claimed to be, I think there are three major implications in our lives. One, if Jesus is God, it doesn't matter what you've done. You see, like if you think that you're too bad to be forgiven by God, you're in good luck, because God in the Bible didn't wait up in heaven for people to climb up to him. Instead, he actually came down to be with people who were bad, to offer us a relationship. It doesn't matter if you think that you've done too bad, or if you committed the worst murder in history. Jesus says you're all forgiven. Actually, Jesus says he came to die because we're bad and we cannot get to heaven on our own. Romans 5:8 says that God shows his love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Right? It's not because we were almost good and we almost made it that Christ came to die for our sins. No, it says that while we were still sinners, because we were bad, because we couldn't get to God by ourselves, that Jesus died for us. So if Jesus is God, it doesn't matter what you've done. On the flip side, if you think that you're pretty good and I deserve to be saved, then Jesus being God is a bad news. Right? There was once a man that came and called Jesus good teacher. What must I do to get into heaven? We talked about this earlier in John. And he responded, oh, no, why do you call me good teacher? No one is good but God alone. Only God is good. And we all agree that in heaven, only good people should end up there. But Jesus is saying that only God is good. Right? Then what does that make us? We're not good. We're all doomed. So if Jesus is God, then we can trust his word that no matter how bad you've done, you're not that bad. And no matter how good you think you've been, you're not good enough. It's all about what Jesus has done for you. Secondly, if Jesus is God, it doesn't matter what you think. I think it's funny that the crowd is discussing Jesus, who Jesus is, because ultimately it doesn't matter who the crowd thinks Jesus is. It matters who Jesus really is. Imagine there are two flies discussing, well, I think a cow is like this, or I think a cow is like that. Well, the cow says, I don't care. Cow doesn't care about what the flies think about him. He's a cow. There was a time in the past when people really believed that the earth was flat. Well, actually, some people still do. I don't want to talk about that. But the earth doesn't care. It was round, and as it always was. If Jesus is God, then he doesn't care what we think or feel or want him to be. Jesus is God, and what he says is final. Not only that, we might have views on what life should be about. Right? We might have opinions on what God's will is for me. I think God's will for me is to become really successful so that when I have influence on TV, I can share about Christ and everyone will come to know Christ. Or I think my life should be about focusing on my studies right now so that I can do well in my career, and when I'm settled, then I can serve God. We can have a lot of opinions about what my life should be about right now. Well, it doesn't matter what our opinions about are. Jesus has already told us what our lives are to be about. It's about saving souls. It's about being involved in ministry, serving others and loving others. That was what the whole conference was about. God didn't leave that choice to us. And the reality is, if Jesus is right, that one day you and I will die and stand before him. And the question will not be, what do I think of Jesus? What do I think about my life? It's, what does Jesus think about me and what I have done with my life? Finally, if Jesus is God, it doesn't matter if you only want, it doesn't matter what you want. Like you might want only a part of Jesus or all of Jesus. There can be only one of two responses. Either you accept him or reject him. That's what C.S. Lewis's quote was talking about. You accept him and surrender to him and commit to him, follow and worship and obey everything that he said, or you reject him, drive him out of your life, crucify him. There's no such thing as I'll accept him but not surrender. I'll accept Jesus' forgiveness, but I'm not going to follow. He didn't leave that choice to us. It's all or nothing, which I think that was why it was a problem. Luke 9:23-24 says, "And he said to all, if anyone will come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it. Whoever loses his life for my sake will save it." Right? There's no middle, moderate response to Jesus. He says, whoever wants to follow me, you need to deny yourself and take up your cross. Right? There was a time, this is a weird example, but imagine like if you invited me for like dinner at your house, and then I come up to your door and then you say, hey, I'm here, and then you say, hey, you're here, but I just want James, not Han. And then I'll be like, what? It's a little bit weird to say, but you can't have just James and not Han. Like, I'm James Han. So you can't just have a part of me. That's kind of like Jesus. You can't just have part of Jesus. Like, I want his sacrifice and I want his salvation, but not follow. There's no such thing as just being a Sunday attendee. Like, I just want to enjoy salvation and enjoy my life, rest of my time. Actually, Jesus wants the whole thing. So there's this fictional story like that a lot of preachers use, but imagine if you're a prisoner of war during the World War II era and you're imprisoned in Japanese confinement. And thankfully the US Navy comes to rescue you, defeats all the guards, opens up the prison and tells you, hey, I'm here to save you. Come follow me. And then you're like, yay, thanks for saving us, but I'm not gonna follow. I'm gonna stay here. You're like, oh yeah, like I believe that you're gonna save me, but I'm gonna stay here. Right? It doesn't make sense. Like you have to follow to be saved. And that's similar to what Jesus is doing. Jesus, he's here to save you, but you need to follow in order to be saved. Right? Jesus says, come, I will make you fishers of men. Right? Jesus has given the Great Commission to each of us. Jesus didn't leave that choice up to us. So there are three implications we talked about. If Jesus is God, it doesn't matter what you've done. It doesn't matter what you think. It doesn't matter what you want. So before we wrap up, let's just talk about these three implications. Just review it with each other. What do these three implications mean, and what do you think is the hardest for you to believe? Yeah, so if Jesus is God, it doesn't matter what you've done, right? Jesus says you're all forgiven. Jesus is God. It doesn't matter what you think about Jesus or think about life, because Jesus has already told us that. If Jesus is God, it doesn't matter what you want. You need to want every part of Jesus. So here's my question to you. Who is Jesus? And how will you know that he is God? Right? Because if Jesus is God, there's these implications. But we talked about the process of elimination, but let's forget about that. Not just by process of elimination and not by reason. How do we know that Jesus is God? Well, there's this interesting verse in verse 17. If anyone's will is to do God's will, he will know whether the teaching is from God or whether I am speaking from my own authority. Right? Jesus has told us that. If anyone's will is to do God's will, he will know whether the teaching is from God or whether he's just kind of crazy. He's just by himself. When an astronomer starts his investigation, or a biologist, they have an instrument they use to start, right? Astronomer has a telescope, a biologist has a microscope. Jesus says, if you want to find me, I'll give you an instrument to use. That's his word, God's will. You have to be willing to do God's will in order to know that Jesus is God. So it's kind of interesting because it's not that you need to know everything about Jesus and believe that Jesus is God to be able to follow God's will. Actually, it's the other way around. When you start to do God's will, when you start to obey and follow Jesus, you gain more confidence and confirmation that Jesus is God. And for a lot of you guys Christian, that's been the case for you, probably. That's been my story. When I committed myself to Jesus, I think I wasn't sure how Christian I was, how much to believe that Jesus really died for my sins. But as I lived it out and as I served and as I continued to follow God's heart, I became more and more confident that Jesus is God, that God is real. This is the way that we were meant to be. As I step into ministry, more I give myself to loving people God has placed around me, the clearer it becomes that this is what I was made for. Anything I could have designed for myself would have been very small by comparison. I think I would have lived for just my own life, my own nuclear family, building software, that'll just probably been my life. But because I involved myself in ministry, when I chose to follow God, to actually say yes, He took that small vision and stretched it far beyond I could imagine. He gave me a vision larger than myself and my generation to come, and He gave me a family that was larger than anything I could imagine. And over the years, through people, right, through obedience, God has shown me again and again that He is real, that we can trust Him. So I know some of you guys really need to take a step of faith towards God and serving. There's a lot of fears, but it doesn't matter because God, it's about what you know about God and how trustworthy He is, and you're able to take that step of faith. Not just to become Christian, but to serve Him more and more, to give more of your time, to love God and obey God's calling for you. So I want to end with this. Just want to hear from you guys. So what is one takeaway or a concrete commitment that you want to have? This form, it goes to a Google form and just goes to me and Mary so that we can really see and how to shape our Sundays. So if you guys can do that for us, we'll end our message like that.